Hello, everybody, and welcome to Psyched Out, a podcast focused on all things psychology, like psychological thrillers, unethical experiments, true crime, cults, and more. I am your host, Emily, and for those who don't know, I have a bachelor's degree in forensic psychology and a background in law enforcement. This helps me provide unique insight on some of the world's most famous cases, movies, and events. In today's episode, we'll be doing part 3 of my Epstein investigation. Lord knows how many parts there will be, but if you want to stay up to date, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That way you're updated on when I post these bigger episodes or even smaller little blips on the YouTube channel. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump on in. So let me shrink myself down here. As you know, I like to come with receipts, so everything in this Discord is screenshotted from my investigation into the Epstein files. I will be doing some references from my phone depending on how much I can zoom in on my computer screen. So if you see me looking down a lot, don't worry about it. I have gotten into a lot of the text-based documents, so less photos are going to be relevant here. So I'm going to provide you with screenshots and direct quotes from the files themselves. I think that's important, so there's no questions, ifs, ands, or buts about whether or not I'm just saying stuff. I will be able to back up what it is that I am saying. Most of these documents come from a deposition by Alex Acosta. I got confused on his name and I called him David at one point in a separate video. His name is Alexander Acosta. He was the U.S. attorney in Florida, and he came under a lot of criticism for his handling of the Epstein case. And I've read about 200 to 300 pages of a deposition of him in court, which is where most of this comes from. This in particular, the first few documents are going to come from specific FBI and state investigative reports. And a lot of the stuff that I have outlined in red is what we're going to be talking about. If it's not outlined in red, it's likely going to be a bunch of text in the screenshot. That's why it's not outlined, because I'm just going to read all of it anyways. So if I repeat myself, I apologize. I can't quite put together everything that I have talked about on TikTok versus YouTube. So if I repeat myself, I do apologize, but I will try my best not to. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a little more about Epstein's victimology and the types of girls that he picked compared to everybody else. I believe I mentioned it in the last episode that Epstein did not like, quote, dark-skinned girls. He very much preferred the white equivalent, which, again, racism is bad, but I think in this instance, it's probably the only time I will ever say that it is okay to be racist, because at least he wasn't victimizing literally everybody. But we also get a little more insight as to the specific type of girl that Epstein liked. So right here it says, blank explained that she was not Epstein's type. The girls she would see at Epstein's house were very thin, beautiful, and without tattoos. Blank explained she had several tattoos that are visible. Maxwell and Epstein have commented negatively about her tattoos previously when she has provided massages. Also, when I say blank, that's because the name is redacted and I don't know who it is. What this says to me very specifically is very thin, very beautiful, and specifically without tattoos. This is important because this is Epstein's equivalent of how can I get these girls as young in appearance as possible. They have to be thin. They can't have tattoos. They can't have any indicators that they are grown and adults. They can't be stained by anything. They have to be this young, innocent archetype for him to feel like that is the best victim for him to have. I thought that this quote in the investigative report really lays out, like, Epstein, though he had access to high school age girls, realistically he wanted them to be as young as possible and as, quote, untainted as possible, as weird as that is to say. These files talk about Epstein's MO, which is basically they come in, they give him a massage, he gratifies himself with that massage. Specifically right here, he asks, as usual, for the victim to rub his chest, but this victim in particular stated that she didn't do that. We go on to our next document, and this is a little more into the investigation of Alex Acosta and the alleged misconduct that took place. This says, blank has been taken off the Jeffrey Epstein case because her husband is employed with attorney Jack Goldberger. Attorney Goldberger is the attorney of record for Jeffrey Epstein. His previous attorney, Guy Fronstein, has been fired from representation. Assistant State Attorney Lana Belholovic, there we go, has been assigned the case. Assistant State Attorney Weiss stated she can no longer speak about the Epstein case with me. I thanked her for her telephone call. ASA Weiss further stated that ASA Belovovic would be calling me. So the federal investigation that was going on alongside the state investigation were both kind of bungled in a way. But basically what this says is there was a conflict of interest because the state attorney Weiss, her husband was working with Epstein's defense team, so obviously that's a little bit awkward. They can't necessarily have that. So this was documented in the police department report. But there is a similar conflict of interest that comes up in Alex Acosta's deposition that I will get to later. But it appears that these conflict of interests were common throughout the investigation, both on a state level and a federal level. But I do believe that the state level handled it better than the federal level, which is a little bit ironic. Underneath this excerpt, we also have something that says, on May 10th, 2006, information was received that Epstein's associate, Leslie Wexner, the Limited Incorporated CEO's plane, had arrived in West Palm Beach. Leslie Wexner, in case you don't know, is the founder of multiple businesses, most notably Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie & Fitch. And if you are familiar with Abercrombie & Fitch, it has come under investigation pretty recently for child sex trafficking as well. And then Victoria's Secret in and of itself is problematic in the sense that it hypersexualizes women. It in a way promotes unhealthy eating behaviors, things like that. A lot of girls go there, but what you'll see is Leslie Wexner's name pops up a lot, and references to Victoria's Secret pop up a lot. Now, Wexner says that he had no idea what was going on, but I also find that hard to believe given Epstein's behavior towards his victims, how he would give them money to specifically go buy Victoria's Secret items that he picked out. Naomi Campbell also makes reference to Victoria's Secret later. I have a screenshot of that document as well. Like I said, just a close-up, Leslie Wexner's name right there. He did visit Palm Beach. He did visit quite a bit. And like I said, just so we're clear, Wexner built his wealth by founding the Limited, Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch, and other retail outlets. Epstein later became Wexner's money manager and benefited greatly from his connection. So again, conflict of interest. At face value, it appears to be a business partnership. Whether or not it was solely a business partnership, I can't say. This is me speculating for legal purposes. I can't say one way or the other whether Wexner was involved, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Next, we have, during a trash pull, this receipt, which was from, I believe it was an Amazon order. What it says here is S&M 101, A Realistic Introduction by Wiseman J, paperback. Then we have Slavecraft, Roadmaps for Erotic Servitude, Principles, Skills, and Tools by Baldwin Guy, also a paperback. And then we have Training with Miss Abernathy, a workbook for erotic slaves and their owners. Abernathy Christina, paperback as well. What this says is, number one, this guy was reading books on sexual deviant behavior. Now, S&M in and of itself can be labeled sexually deviant, but realistically, it's not problematic when it's between two consenting adults. There's no issue with that. People are into certain things. I'm not going to yuck that yum. The problem is that this is a direct reflection of his pathology, referencing the slave craft and the erotic slaves. Given the fact that Epstein was involved in a massive sex trafficking ring, this is all we really need to know. The fact that he is reading books on sex slaves really tells a lot about his inner monologue, which may be a light term, but him reading up on this and buying multiple books about specific sex slaves when he's actively having sex slaves is, I don't want to say ironic, but it's very telling. And this, again, was taken in a trash poll. This is one of the few screenshots that I remembered to take. Next, we also have this from a trash poll, which says, for Mr. Wexner from Mr. Epstein, 2 pages including, and then I can't tell. I think this second word is cover, but I don't know. It's a little hard to read. But again, Wexner is very important in all of this. He is referenced a lot. There's very clearly multiple communications between him and Epstein. Again, we have Jean-Luc here. This note was written at 6:20 p.m. I will read what this one says, and then I will show you a picture of the note actually bagged as evidence. But it says, Jean-Luc, he spoke to the specialist about your symptoms. The doc said it is a Bratislavian virus. It is curable, but you have to move it. It can cause impotence of the muscle, which can shorten your sex life. Here is the note in and of itself. It was bagged as number 7 from the trash pull. Again, it says he spoke to the doctor about your symptoms. It is Bratislavian virus. It can be cured, but you have to move. It can cause impotence of the muscle, which can shorten your sex life. We already know that Jean-Luc basically lived on Epstein's properties. We know that Jean-Luc offed himself in jail in Paris because he was convicted of sexual intercourse with minors, rape, all of that stuff. So again, this isn't too surprising seeing this correspondence between Epstein and Jean-Luc, but again, it just kind of reaffirms how deeply embedded they were in each other's lives. And then it's also just deeply disturbing that he's like, hey dude, this is gonna ruin your sex life, knowing what type of people Jean-Luc is having sex with. It's just gross. It's gross. The implication is upsetting. And I think implication is a loose term for what's going on here. But they both know who they're having sex with. They both know what kind of sexual predators they are. So in my opinion, I don't care if you have a short sex life, dude. Go fuck yourself. Alright, that's the end of that little tidbit. To lighten the mood, I thought this was kind of funny. Kevin over on TikTok said, "Are you killing time before a burglary?" ? Because I was wearing a black jacket and a beanie, and I was sitting in my car after my shift, and I said, no, I'm actually a cop. I have to wear black underclothing, which makes this comment even funnier. I thought that was a little silly, given the fact that these topics are so heavy. Sometimes it's okay to laugh. So if you thought that was funny, I did too. You're not alone. But we're going to go ahead and move on. So during another trash poll, we have an itemized list. Number 1 says blank car extension for 1 month. And then that says to, I think 9 o'clock? I don't know. Bucket of roses to blank high school for blank. Give the flowers at 8:30 to, and then I think it says SB, but I don't know what that means, to give it to her at the blank after blank. So what I want to talk about here is, and if you have listened to my Wicked episodes on the podcast or on my YouTube channel, grooming. I've gone over grooming before, but these victims have alleged on more than one occasion that Epstein very much groomed them. There is one victim in particular who was rented a high-end car by Epstein, and he would continue to extend the lease so that she was able to drive around, run errands for him, and then go, quote, work for him as well. There's another victim who said that he got her bouquets of roses, and that is what's referenced here. Notice it says high school, so again, we're dealing with a minor. The way grooming works is it's very intentional, and more often than not, it's from somebody who wants sexual favors in return. And it tends to work more on younger individuals because their brains aren't fully formed, and it's a bit easier to manipulate them. Granted, you can groom adults, and there are instances in the Epstein files where victims' parents were groomed to like Epstein because he would pay their bills, he would pay their rent. Again, Epstein's pulling from poor communities, so he's giving gifts to the adults saying, hey, I'm a nice guy, I'm just here to help. So they lower their guard when it comes to their kids. But I'm going to talk specifically about the victims that were groomed. So this behavior a lot of time comes with gift giving. It's almost always guaranteed. Obviously, he's giving people car leases and bouquets of roses. This is designed to make the victim feel special. He wants them to think that they are the his prized possession in a way. It's to give them a sense of security, that he is a good guy, that he is going to help them. And it also establishes this dynamic of, well, you kind of owe me because I'm doing all of these nice things for you. So it gives them a little bit of guilt if they, say, refuse a sexual advance or a sexual encounter. Grooming also stems from feelings of shame and isolation, where nobody else is going to know what you're going through. Nobody else is going to be able to relate to the fact that this is what's happening to you. this is your fault, things like that. And it's a very, very slow process. It doesn't just happen overnight. And in these documents, what we see is that these victims go, they meet Epstein, they get a very traumatic experience while there, and then they leave. And then they end up coming back because Epstein goes, oh, hey, you were so good at this. I really want you to come back and work. Oh, I'll pay your bills. I'll pay your college education fund. And so they excuse the negative behaviors that he's doing because of these other behaviors that make them feel special. Like what they're doing isn't inherently wrong because in a way they're being rewarded for it. Part of the grooming process for Epstein as well was that a lot of times during a girl's first visit, Maxwell was also there in the room when the assaults were happening. And that kind of lowered the victim's defenses because it was like, well, there's a grown woman here. If something weird was going on or this was completely inappropriate, she would say or do something. So it gives them a false sense of security. So I want to make it very clear that these victims were psychologically manipulated and groomed into participating in this type of behavior. There were certain victims that Epstein and Maxwell would take out shopping. They would take them to the movies. They basically acted as these pseudo parents to them. Some even said that Maxwell was like a big sister to them. So they're building these emotional relationships with the victims. And then when they're victimized, it's troubling, obviously, but they've built that bond and that manipulation to the point where the victims are able to write it off and excuse it in their own minds because, oh, well, they would never do anything that's wrong. They would never do anything to hurt me or abuse me because they've taken me shopping. They've taken me to the movies. Another thing, Epstein and Maxwell often ask these victims, well, what are your goals in life? What do you want to do with your career? And then once they got that information, they would weaponize that information. They would also ask, hey, what's your family life like? Where do you live? And being young and wanting to appease authoritative figures, these girls would say, oh, I live in a trailer park. My dad's not around. My mom's addicted to drugs. And so this gives Epstein and Maxwell an in to go, oh, okay, well, we'll take you under our wing. We'll pay your college tuition when you graduate high school. You want to be an actress? We'll pay for acting classes. And they step in and access these vulnerabilities. And these kids are like, oh my God, I'm getting the attention and the love and the compassion that I've never had before. I'm having opportunities that I'm not going to have otherwise. So it was very calculated, very, very calculated. So I don't want anybody to be like, oh, well, they were 16 or 17. They should know better. They should know what they're doing. If that's your mentality, get out of here. I don't want you watching this video. I don't want you listening to this podcast. I don't want you here at all because this type of psychological manipulation is incredibly effective, and there's a reason that it happens a lot with kids and sexual predators. In this next photo, we have something from a book called Massage for Dummies. This picture is very grainy. It's kind of hard to see, but it's titled with limb draping. There's a man laying in a towel with his arms across his chest. And it appears like if you kind of look at it, there's a leg kind of draped over him from the woman standing here. It's very hard to tell. But keep this in mind. There's references to belly touching, hair gliding, limb draping. This is another photo from the same book. And this talks about chest rubbing. And this is a photo of the hair gliding. Now, I want to make it very clear that what I noticed about these photos is that this is almost Epstein's MO to a T. The chest rubbing is described in this book as very vulnerable and sensitive areas. Basically, sex organs that most people don't think about. Now, mind you, this is a man only in a towel who first starts laying on his stomach, then turns over to his back and has a woman rub his chest. Now, what was Epstein's MO? Oh, yeah, that's right. He comes out in a towel. He starts by laying on his stomach. He has people, he has the girls start rubbing his calves, his feet, his back. Then he flips over. Then he specifically asks them to rub his chest area, at which point he starts to gratify himself until he ejaculates and the massage is done. That is exactly what is depicted in this book. This is exactly the starting, this is exactly when Epstein flips over, and this is exactly when he starts having them rub his chest. He also, in many instances, when it comes to the limb draping in this book, asks the girls to straddle him when he was laying on his back, to sit on top of him. So it seems he got his entire MO from this specific massage book. And if that's not weird enough, he actually ends up gifting a version of this massage book to one of the victims, who she specifically mentions in a police report to Palm Beach authorities, where he gave her a Massage for Dummies book. This is very interesting. And the fact that he gave it to a victim tells me that he thought it was a little bit funny, because it's like, oh, well, she's going to read this. This is a cover to make her better at massages, yada, yada, yada. But he knows what the true meaning of it is and what these pictures represent. And I don't think Epstein's stupid enough to not have done it intentionally. I also think that having her read this book would normalize the behavior that he's doing. Oh, well, he wants me to straddle him. Well, that was in the massage book. Oh, he wants me to rub his chest. Well, that was in the massage book. So, in another way, a way to desensitize and groom the victim. Next, we have. Yes, this paragraph. So, this is a deposition by one of the investigators. It's the question is, we've spoken to her approximately. For today's purposes, I'm just going to refer to her as blank. About how many times have you interviewed blank? The investigator says, we've spoken to her approximately 5 times. The questioner says, turning to the next slide, are these photos of blank? The investigator says, yes. Questioner, did she tell you approximately how old she was when both of these photographs were taken? Yes. What did she tell you? The photo on the left, she was approximately 13 years old. So, as of right now, the youngest victim I can identify for Epstein is somebody who was at the oldest 17 and at the youngest 13, almost 14 years old. And that is atrocious. That is disgusting, because technically 13 is when you are a teenager. That's when you first become a teenager. But realistically, the difference between a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old really isn't that much at all. That is still a child. That is still somebody who is in the throes of youth. And it just disgusts me to know that he was able to victimize somebody this young. And I don't know how he got a hold of a 13-year-old. I don't know what the circumstances are with her parents. But it's just really upsetting, because a lot of people failed her for this to happen. Next, we go back to victimology. The investigator states that the victim he was interviewing, would say she found them at parties in reference to her recruiting other girls, or in the neighborhood she was living at the time with blank. She described it as a trailer park environment that she brought girls from, but some were school when she was still there, and then just parties. So what this tells me, again, is that these are girls who, in interviews with law enforcement, openly stated that they were living with people who were actively using drugs. They had parents that weren't in the picture. They were living in trailer parks. Very, very poor, low-income families. Much easier to victimize than wealthy families, because if you have a rich dude stepping in to say, oh, hey, I'm going to buy your kid a car, somebody in a wealthy community is going to go, well, that's weird, don't do that. But in a poor community, somebody is more likely to be enticed by that gift and say, oh, wow, like, thank you for being philanthropic and, helping us. They're more likely to accept those gifts. And then the kids are more likely to want that lavish lifestyle, to want a car, to want things that they can't have compared to their peers. And so not only is Epstein able to victimize this community, but these girls are able to victimize each other within this community, because they know what those types of kids want. They are one of them. They know that they want somebody to take care of them financially. They want to get out of a trailer park. They want to make their own money. They want to be somebody. They want to be adult-like and grown and make their own decisions, because they don't have that personal autonomy otherwise. So it becomes this self-fulfilling cycle of, once Epstein victimizes people within these communities, he can say, hey, I will still pay you if you go get other girls within that community to come take the sexual abuse. I won't victimize you anymore, but you have to go get other people for me to victimize. And these girls are more than willing to do so, again, because of the grooming, but also because of the community that they're part of, to go victimize other people within that community. And it's a lot easier to do so because they have personal connections within these communities. They know they're going to be more likely to be trusted by other kids in that community than if they went up to a stranger that they don't know. But this also highlights the fact that Epstein also specifically targeted high schools, because some were in school That's how these victims had connections to victimize other girls. All right. So I also want to talk about Epstein's intelligence to a certain extent. I don't want to give him credit because I realistically think that he's fucking stupid and I hate him because he's awful. But again, in questioning the investigator. So the day after the phone call we've just discussed, has blank provided you with a deposit slip for January 4th, 2005? Yes. And did she deposit cash that day? Yes. About how much? She deposited about $150, $100 bill, two 20s, and a 10. Anytime that the money deposits and bank records are questioned or discussed, it is specifically stated that Epstein paid people in cash and cash only. And this is a business guy, so he knows this type of stuff is tracked. So I think him paying people in cash is incredibly deliberate because it's a lot harder to trace than if you're using exclusively like credit cards, debit cards, even though it was pretty new at the time, electric or electronic transfers of money. If he's pulling cash from his own account and then handing that cash to a victim, that transaction in and of itself isn't going to be traced. All anybody's going to be able to know is, oh, Epstein pulled out $500 of cash from his bank account. So this is very deliberate. It takes out some of the evidence against him that could have been used to help corroborate the fact that he was actively paying children to have sex with him. So again, very deliberate. If you go through the documents, you'll see time and time again that all of the victims are like, oh, he paid me in cash. In many instances, there were just $200, $300 sitting on the dresser nearby, and then they would just take the cash and leave after Epstein finished gratifying himself. All right. Moving on. We have another section of notes from a trash pull. The first one is for Epstein from somebody named Darrow or Darion. It says he has the info, please call him. Another one is for Epstein for somebody that is redacted, and it says, wondering if you want her to work tomorrow and what time. Again, the word work means sex. There is a note for Jeffrey Epstein from Donald Trump. The number is redacted. There's no message left. And then the other one is unreadable due to redactions. Next, we have, I want to say next we're getting into Alex Acosta's deposition. But I want to make sure. No, we're not. Okay, we're still in the Palm Beach investigation. Perfect. All right. So what I underlined here is a question that says, has the FBI investigated Maxwell and Epstein's conduct with minors during the 1990s? The answer is yes. And why I underlined this is because this investigation, the Epstein Palm Beach investigation, began in the early 2000s. And the fact that this goes back to the 1990s, as I speculated in a prior episode, really indicates that Epstein's been doing this for a very long time. That is how he got as good as he did at it. But I just didn't expect it to be that far back. I thought maybe a couple years prior to the investigation. But no, it's almost a decade and a half prior to when the Palm Beach investigation began. Which leads me to question how many victims are out there that we don't know about, that may have passed away, that may have, I mean, you don't know. Lord knows where they're at or what happened. Or what the exact number is of the amount of people that were victimized by him. It's absolutely crazy to think about. Next, we have a whole excerpt that I'm going to read. From what blank told you, how did blank work change once Maxwell arrived on the scene? This is in reference to some employees that were interviewed. Answer. Blank described Epstein as being more pleasant to work with prior to Maxwell coming into the picture. Once she came into the picture, he said things became more secretive. He wasn't allowed to be in the room with guests, wasn't allowed to talk with them, associate with them. It became a different environment. Question. You talked about some of the rules that were placed changing. Were there any rule changes about eye contact once Maxwell began staying in the Palm Beach house? The answer being, yes, blank wasn't allowed to make eye contact with Epstein and others. In general, this is a question, how did he describe what it was like to work for Maxwell? Answer, he said she was very demanding, she was on top of him all the time. He described her as a, quote, bitch. Again, what this shows to me is that Maxwell is the dominant personality and Epstein is the submissive personality. I can't remember if I talked about this in another video or not, so I'm just going to go over it again. But when we have serial predators that work together, oftentimes there is a dominant personality and a submissive personality. Think of the Ken and Barbie killer. Think of Ian and Myra in the Moors murder. You cannot fundamentally have two dominant personalities and two submissive personalities because it doesn't work. There has to be a balance. There has to be somebody in charge of it who's saying, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and you have somebody else to support that. I have always been a firm believer that Maxwell is the dominant personality and Epstein is the submissive personality. This right here, this whole section, helps highlight that. She came in and basically said, if you want to do this operation, this is how you're going to do it. Your employees cannot be part of this and know everything that is going on. They'll probably figure it out over time, but if they start questioning, then we have problems. They can't make eye contact with you. They can't be in this room. They can't be in that room. They cannot talk to the guests. Maxwell said, we're switching this shit up if you're going to want to make this work, and here's how we're going to do it. And that's why she's described as, quote, a bitch and a cold person and a domineering individual. It's also why I believe Epstein was oft in prison and Maxwell was not, because Maxwell knows more than Epstein did and she has all the receipts. Just my spiel on that. Also, I want to make note that throughout the Palm Beach investigation, it became clear that there was a high turnover rate of employees at Epstein's residence. Mostly because I think Epstein could tell, or at least Maxwell could tell, when people started to get too curious, or when people were concerned about what was going on. There are individuals that stayed there for maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, and were thrown out without much of a reason why. They were fired. And then there are other employees who were there for like 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, who had a very big, long tenure. Now, those employees I'm very curious of because there's a reason that they were kept around as long as they were. And that leads me to believe that they were complicit in what was going on and just decided not to ask questions. Okay, now back to the grooming. This kind of corroborates that. It also talks about Wexner and Victoria's Secret. Question, and when they were alone together, did Epstein ask what she wanted to do with her life? Answer, he did. What did she say? She said she wanted to be an actress and a model. How did Epstein respond? He told her that he was best friends with the owner of Victoria's Secret, told her that she would have to have photographs taken and that she got to be comfortable in her underwear and not be a prude. When she asked what that meant, he pulled her into his lap and masturbated. Question, what was her reaction? She felt paralyzed. She froze. After this incident, did blank encounters with Epstein begin to include sexual contact? So again, as I said with the grooming, he gets very intentional personal details from people and then weaponizes that against them. He could have just asked what she wanted to do with her life and been like, okay, cool. But the fact that he then goes, oh, I'm best friends with the owner of Victoria's Secret. This is a man of high status. He has a lot of connection. This is one way to get a vulnerable child to go, oh, well, I mean, if this is what I have to do to get my dreams to become a reality, so be it. I'll let him do whatever he wants so that I can make it as a model in Victoria's Secret, because apparently Epstein's best friends with Leslie Wexner. Also, again, this highlights the fact that I don't think Wexner was ignorant to what was going on. Could you please describe for the grand jury what Blank told you about that incident? Blank said that Maxwell had shown her to a bedroom and on the bed was a schoolgirl outfit, and Maxwell told her when Blank confronted her about it, and Maxwell said, quote, well, I thought it would be adorable if you gave Jeffrey his tea in this, end quote. So Blank felt like she had to put it on, so she put it on, took Epstein his tea, and Epstein then slapped her on the buttocks and reached under the skirt and touched her. Question, what was her demeanor like when she described this incident to you? Answer, she was crying. She was very upset. Question, when Blank described seeing the schoolgirl outfit and talking to Maxwell about it, did she remember Maxwell telling her, quote, don't be so frigid, end quote? Answer, yes. So why I thought this was very interesting is because if we go back in our little Discord server to the photo of the schoolgirl uniforms, wow, I got tongue-tied. The schoolgirl uniforms, this shows that they actually were used, and that my initial suspicions were not incorrect about their purpose and why they were there. and that they were used and weaponized to have inappropriate contact with victims. And again, this goes to the victim's mentality of feeling like they have to cooperate with what's going on because, one, they don't really have another option, and two, they're being groomed, they're being given gifts, they're being manipulated to participate into inappropriate situations, and they don't know how to get out of it. It also shows the emotional side of things where this could have happened years ago, and just talking about it gets them upset. So whether or not they were complicit in certain people's minds and opinions, this directly contradicts that, where being complicit doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't have an effect on them. And when I say complicit, that's not my belief system. What I want to talk about while I'm thinking about it is that a lot of people only think of fight and, like, fight, flight, freeze. There's actually a fourth option, which is fawn. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And a lot of people have a predominant response to when that fight or flight kicks in. I myself am a fighter. I have been put in situations where I've actually had to fight people because I can't run away. And in my job, you are trained that you don't get the option to run away. So I predominantly resort to fight. I have been that way for a very long time. However, in my job, I also have resorted to fawn a lot. And what that means is if you are presented in a situation where your fight or flight kicks in, you can't escape, you can't fight, the best option is either freezing, which isn't going to do much for you, or fawning, which is, okay, I'm going to be submissive to a certain extent in what's going on. I'm going to try and de-escalate things. I'm going to regulate their emotions so that they don't do anything bad to me. I'm going to allow certain things to happen, and I'm going to keep myself in check so that I can keep them in check. And I am a firm believer that that is what happened with a lot of these victims, where they knew what was happening was wrong. They can't fight the guy. They can't run away from the guy. They're in his house. What are they supposed to do? They either freeze or they fawn. And a lot of these victims were like, oh, well, I'll let this happen. I'll make sure he's happy so he doesn't do anything to me, and then I'm getting the fuck out of there. So regardless of them staying, whether it was that they freeze, or whether it was that they froze, or whether it was that they fawned, that doesn't make them inherently complicit in what happened, and it doesn't negate the fact that what happened to them was traumatic, and there's clearly emotion years after the fact. Okay, now what we're going to talk about here is, let me look over this really quick. Okay, gotcha. All right, so question: what did blank remember about how he first met blank and blank? This is in reference to the boyfriend who brought his girlfriend to Epstein's house for the first time. Answer: he recalls driving Maxwell to a massage appointment at Mar-a-Lago. Actually, incorrect. I'm thinking of a different document. What this is a driver, an employee of Epstein. So, anywho, the driver recalls driving Maxwell to a massage appointment at Mar-a-Lago. He was told to wait in the car while she got her massage. When she was done, she got in the car and they started leaving the property. At some point during that drive, while still on the property, she asked him to stop. She got out of the car and approached a female who was wearing a uniform at the time. Remember, this is still on Mar-a-Lago. Maxwell spoke to that female for about 20 minutes, and Mr. Blank could not hear the conversation. Maxwell then got back in the car and drove back to Epstein's house. Shortly thereafter, later that day, that same girl arrived at the house. She soon became a regular at the house, and Blank later learned her name to be Blank. So, another tie to Trump and Mar-a-Lago and some of the allegations going on there. Again, this isn't me saying, oh, Trump's guilty, blah, 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 but it's important to make note of that there is connection there. It also shows how bold Maxwell was in her recruiting practices, and the fact that she would just ask random-ass people. Again, this is an account from an employee. I apologize for misspeaking earlier. There's a similar account from a boyfriend that involves cars and Maxwell and bringing somebody to the house for the first time, so I got a little confused. But yeah, interesting stuff. I believe that that employee actually was fired shortly after. Here we have, wouldn't you know it, email logs. Now, this one's from Naomi Campbell. If you remember, Naomi Campbell was mentioned in last episode. It says, hello, Naomi here. Would like to know when I can speak with Jeffrey regarding my swimsuit line for a meeting with VS, which is Victoria's Secret. To see, I have pics in some of the suits with me. Hope is well. Another reference to Victoria's Secret and Naomi Campbell. Coincidence? I don't know. It's kind of getting hard to say. It's just a coincidence. Okay, now I'm pretty sure we're getting to the Acosta stuff. Yeah, it is, because this is his speech pattern. So I am going to try and read this as fluently as I can. The problem with these documents is it's all just trains of thought in this deposition, so it gets a little confusing, and the words aren't always easy to read, but I will do my best. Question. So you mentioned victim, but could I? Yes. But to clarify, I thought we had sufficient to go forward, so it wasn't an ethical violation to proceed. Okay. The victim, you mentioned the victims coming into state court, and you talked about all the victims coming into state court. Do you have any idea what victims formed the basis of the original charge that I do not? He was indicted on. Do you know whether it was one? Was it a felony assault pro of a non-minor? It could have been. It was 3 instances to felonize it. You don't know whether it was one person 3 times or 3 people. Answer, I do not. And you don't know whether that person was a minor or not. I do not. All right. So what that is somebody that is part of the FPO or the PFO. It's a professional review board in the DOJ, asking Acosta, well, you're the U.S. attorney that is in charge of all of this. Do you even know anything about the victims that were involved in this case? Specifically, do you know if it was one victim who was assaulted 3 times, or was it 3 separate victims? And Acosta says, oh, gee, I don't know. And then he's asked, well, do you know if they were minors? And Acosta says, I don't know. And if you've seen my videos about this man, he baffles me. Like, beyond belief. Let me get a sip of water real quick. Absolutely baffles me, because he's in charge of this, and yet fundamentally he has no fucking clue about anything that is going on. And this is the first example that really stood out to me, where I was like, this dude, he was bound to fail the victims because he doesn't even know who the victims are. He can't even tell you if the reason his case is supposed to be a federal issue is because it was one victim assaulted 3 times, or if it was 3 different victims. And he can't even tell you if they're minors. Hello? But don't worry, guys, because it continues to get worse. But again, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit. Harry Potter is mentioned in the Epstein files. It says, so if you had been back in that time frame in early September looking at this with, I don't know what Harry Potter character it is. I just thought that was a little silly. But yeah. Okay, this document. There's a lot to read here, so forgive me. To ultimately a letter from you coming on the 19th of December 2007, which is number 41B, agreeing to notify the victims of the state plea and agreeing with the defense to have the state be responsible for putting out that notification. And then we end ultimately with a letter or draft letter that we have that goes out to the victims in the case on after the plea in July. Well, we have the draft I'm going to show you, which comes in June, showing that the letter was clearly meant to be sent after the plea as per the agreement, and that is document number 51. Okay, so it's a lot to unpack there. That's a lot to unpack. We should probably take it a step at a time. What this is in reference to is an NPA that was put in place in the Epstein case by Acosta. And an NPA is a plea deal, but it's a non-prosecutorial agreement. And what Acosta wanted was, well, we're not really going to charge at the federal level because it could be a manifest injustice. He also talked about a petite policy. And basically a petite policy is, well, we're going to not have the federal government charge when it's a state issue. We'll just have the state do it. And a manifest injustice is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically like over-punishing for a crime that doesn't really deserve that type of punishment. And those were his big concerns. So when he drafted up the NPA, it was originally supposed to be 2 years of time served for Epstein. He had to register as a sex offender, and then he also had to pay restitution. And first of all, that is a joke of an agreement. That is fucking stupid as shit. Given the circumstances of the case. What this is saying is in reference to when the agreement was signed and the victims involved. Now, victims legally have a right to go to court and discuss a plea deal before it is signed, to give victim impact statements, to give their opinions on it. And the issue here was that Acosta said, well, it's going to be a federal issue. We'll leave it up to the federal courts to notify the victims. And the federal courts said, well, we'll leave it up to the state courts to notify the victims. And then it fell to local police agencies to notify the victims. And consequently, there were victims that weren't notified at all about the plea deal being signed, let alone the fact that there was a plea deal in place. So, my opinion is that Acosta really just fundamentally does not give a fuck about the victims or anything of the sort. Continuing on with this. So, and in the same manner, though, while the CVRA, which is Crime Victims' Rights Act, isn't legally binding, it also doesn't prevent you from notifying the victims, does it? It does not, no. And you have the discretion to notify should you choose to, correct? Okay, and so if you look at the letter that's attached to this, this is a draft that goes out where on page 1 to page 3 of the letter, and the second to last paragraph, the letter is giving notice of Mr. Epstein's change of plea and sentencing that will occur on, at this time, December 14th, 2007. And it gives the address, and it says underneath that you are entitled to be present and make a statement under oath. If you choose, you can submit a written statement under oath, etc., etc. So this is a letter that's actively inviting victims to come to the state. Would you agree that that's inviting victims to come to the state plea? I think that's fair. And with the letter's reasoning that the government is sending, would like to send this letter because it believes it's obligated to, because it resolves the federal case. So again, this is a letter that was sent out that was supposed to go to victims saying, hey, show up in court. We want your thoughts and feelings on this. And there were victims that did not receive this at all. Okay, now moving on. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. We are fortunate in this case to have a plethora of documents upon which we can rely even 12 years or so after the fact, and we've tried to plumb the depths of your memory as to the events. Are there any facts, any conversations, any incidents, anything based on the questions that you've heard here today that you have recalled, that you want to tell us about, want us to know? So give me a minute to just sort of think this through. Of course. I think we've covered most of the issues pretty clearly. I guess I would have two general comments. The first is whether folks agree or disagree with the initial 2 years, registration and restitution. The office's focus was on having Mr. Epstein go to jail at the time when, from our perspective, these cases were at least presented with these facts, federally at least unusual, and that most trafficking cases involved a different sort of nexus. It involved bringing individuals into the country or holding individuals against their will or doing something like that. And this will go to my second point, which is, sitting here, we now see several high-profile individuals who abused power and have now been prosecuted, who were known at the time who abused drugs like Bill Cosby and there were rumors at the time. And so looking back, maybe it was the right call. What pisses me off about this is Acosta's sitting there and basically saying, well, the reason we had such a light sentence for him was because I didn't understand what the fuck I was talking about, or what the hell sex trafficking was. I thought it was a bunch of foreigners being brought into this country at gunpoint, being forced to have sex with people. I didn't think that it was mostly local people being trafficked across multiple cities into Florida. I didn't think that constituted sex trafficking. So I just didn't know what that meant. And then now 12 years later, there's been multiple cases like this. So, in hindsight, dude, you are in charge of this. Why would you not want to look into different types of sex trafficking? Why would you just go based on an assumption that you have that is fucking incorrect? I don't understand the thought process here. And I don't know if I'm going to get into it later with other documents because I can't remember everything that is screenshotted. But this dude, throughout this entire deposition, is like, oh, well, I think the 2 years was justifiable. He is like, well, I initially wanted to set it at 3 so that he could plead down to 2. Are you fucking stupid? In what universe is 3 years appropriate for the type of crime that Epstein committed in Florida? In what universe? And then it gets worse because this dude knows Ken Starr, who is like the biggest attorney on Epstein's defense team. They used to work professionally. They know each other. He described themselves as professional acquaintances. So already there's another conflict of interest. And when we talked earlier about the previous conflict of interest, that attorney excused herself from the case. You know who didn't? Acosta. Acosta did not excuse himself from the case. And actually, I'm pretty sure I have a screenshot of it, but later, he ends up being removed from the case because he's seeking employment at the law firm that is representing Epstein. Which means that in order to be employed there, he was seeking employment while he was still in charge of this case. That's a problem. That is a huge fucking problem. On top of that, Acosta goes, well, our intention was always to hold firm to the 2 years. And then they end up pleading it down to 18 months. So he couldn't even stick with the 2-year mark. He allowed them to reduce it to 18 months. And he's like, oh, well, I did my job. I held firm. I wasn't pushed around by anybody. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, keep telling yourself that, dude. Because realistically, that's not true. That is completely inaccurate. And if you can't tell, I'm pissed off. Because I think it's freaking ridiculous. He goes on. And he says, I think a second issue that has been lost in the coverage of this matter is there are references to Prince Andrew and Alex Dershowitz and Governor Richardson and Bill Clinton and things happening in London and the so-called Lolita Express where things may have happened on airplanes. And so this is viewed from the public as this international matter where the victims were local. The actions, to my recollection, were local. And so the distinction between this Palm Beach incident and what the media likes to cover, which is, did Mr. Epstein force a minor to have sexual relations with Prince Andrew, is a very different fact pattern, both in terms of the public perception of forcing a minor to have sex with a third party that they have, that is outside the solicitation context. So again, this goes back to his understanding of sex trafficking and him being like, oh, well, the media is mad at me for not, grilling this guy with our plea agreement, but we're not talking about the, international issues, we're talking about the local issues, as if the local issues aren't just as bad as the international issues. Also, I don't know how Epstein wasn't charged with RICO charges for having a criminal enterprise. Because I think that would be prime pickings for RICO, but whatever, that doesn't happen. And again, Acosta's just talking out of his ass and is like, well, the media's just mad because I didn't punish Epstein. Well, we're not dealing with the international issues. We're dealing with the local issues. Okay, is it not justifiable for people to be pissed off when this guy clearly shows he has international capabilities of sex trafficking and then also is trafficking locally? Like, the potential here is insane, right? He's a dangerous predator. You should be just as concerned with the local issues as you are with the international issues, and you should punish him accordingly with the local issues, which are he is getting kids from high schools, local high schools, and repeatedly victimizing them. But remember, he doesn't know who the victims are in the Palm Beach case because he doesn't know if they're minors, he doesn't know if it was one victim, and he doesn't know if it was 3 victims. This guy is so fundamentally uninformed on the case that he's supposed to be in charge of. It's fucking terrible. There's also emails that say, quote, more aggressive than any of which I or the prosecutors in my office had previously encountered. You noted that the defense investigated prosecutors and tried to disqualify 2, and I believe that those 2 are blank and blank. Is that correct? That is correct. And you also noted or asserted that there were investigations into the family lives of individual prosecutors, accusations of bias and misconduct against individual prosecutors, and even the threat of a book on prosecutorial zeal. Do you still regard that characterization as accurate? I do. Whether I would have used those same words now, we can spend a lot of time talking about it, and I'd want basically what happened and how this plea deal got so fucked up was because Epstein's lawyers were prepared. They were insane. They came in with receipts. They came in with a goal. They were prepared to take names and numbers and rip people's jugulars out, and the prosecution was not even remotely prepared for that type of response or reaction from Epstein, which is ridiculous because I don't know why you wouldn't expect that, but whatever, what do I know? And there are emails, and I think I forgot to screenshot some of them, but there are emails from Acosta's lower level attorneys saying, hey, I'm struggling with these negotiations. They're not going through. And Acosta was of the opinion, okay, well, if we can't get the plea deal, then we indict him federally and we take it to court. And every single time his attorneys reached out to him and said, look, we need to just give this shit up, Acosta would say, no, keep trying, keep trying, keep trying, which is why the plea deal itself, which was already astronomically lenient, got pled down even further because his attorneys were under the impression that they had to get this plea deal signed. And part of the reason that was a big issue is because Acosta was of the opinion that the victims had conflicting accounts. They weren't entirely accurate down to the T, and how some people went there and weren't victimized, but others were. Therefore, there's going to be problems on the stand. I can't trust the witnesses. All this other shit. He was very scared about taking it to trial. And I think it was that he was fucking lazy and he didn't want to do it. Because while the victims do have differences in their stories, there is so much overlap within their stories that you can't look at them and say that, oh, you're lying. Every single one of them has Epstein's specific MO down to a T. They describe it so on point, so easily, that you could put 17 of them on the stand and maybe there's some discrepancies in their story. But that MO is going to be the same every single time. Every time. And so for there to be an email in which Acosta says that the prosecution was more aggressive than any of which I or the prosecutors in my office had previously encountered, says everything I need to know. This guy was not prepared. And on top of that, he did dick all to protect those working for him because Epstein's attorneys went after his people. And so those people are under stress because their families are now being targeted. And this fucker is over here like, oh no, we really want that plea deal signed. Take his ass to trial, dude. What are you doing? He also, in the construction of the plea deal, said that Epstein had to give his, quote, best efforts to abide by the rules. And so then when Epstein wasn't turning himself in later, all Epstein had to do was, oh, well, I'm giving my best efforts. I'm giving my best efforts. There was no punishment or deadline, or if Epstein failed to meet the deadline, there was no punishment. Because he specifically wrote that Epstein had to give his, quote, best efforts. This guy is so fundamentally unqualified and fucking stupid in this case. And it gets worse. Okay, and just one thing on the work release issue. Did you tell the defense that the U.S. Attorney's Office would not object if he got work release as long as he was treated like every other defendant? So I don't recall what I may or may not have said specifically around work release. My recollection of our general position is you're pleading in state court to incarceration of 18. It's now 18 months. It was 24. Whether it was 18 or 24, this would have been any conversation I would have had would have been after the agreement was signed. It's our expectation that he be treated just like anyone else. If it was typical to provide that kind of work release in these cases, that would have been news to me. I certainly would not have expected that, and I think based on our subsequent communication with the state attorney's office, that was not what our office envisioned. By the same token, I don't think our office envisioned that he be treated worth the typical offender. And the interesting thing here is two conflicting statements. Down at the bottom, he says, oh, well, I don't want Epstein to be treated like the typical offender. And then up here, he says, I would have treated him like every other offender in this case. So which one is it, buddy? Which one is it? Because at this point, you're bending over backwards to give Epstein and his defense team whatever the fuck they want because you don't want to go to trial. Now, he then goes, well, I don't really know how the work release happened. Well, it had to have happened somehow. And if it's in an agreement, you had to have approved it somehow. What I think is you don't want to take the heat for it because you realized how much he actually fucked up. Also, when it comes to the sentiment of, oh, well, I'm going to treat him like everybody else, you do realize that this is probably the most high-profile, largest sexual predator that the United States has ever seen, and you want to treat him like everybody else? Really? That is the dumbest shit that I have ever heard in my entire life. And then you immediately contradict yourself afterwards and saying, oh, well, I shouldn't because he's such a high-profile person. Really, dude? You don't even know what your own belief and stance is. We go on. Mainly emails, but other electronic holdings from the department. The Department of Justice, however, has not been able to find or recover a portion of your email account as U.S. Attorney that contained emails received by you between May 26, 2007 and March 2008. Correct. A period of time rather relevant to this. We have obtained many records, of course, from senders and from other people copied. So we have many of the records, but the fact is that's a gap in the holdings, and this is despite the fact that, as you no doubt know, the law requires that U.S. Attorney records be maintained and archived indefinitely. Can you give us any insight, any idea why that might be the case? So what this is referencing is the fact that during the Epstein investigation, the height of this investigation in like the mid-2000s, there is a vast chunk of emails from Acosta, both received and sent, that are missing. And what the questioner is saying is, you know that you're required as U.S. attorney to have records of those emails. And Acosta originally is like, oh, well, we switched automated recording systems, so I'm assuming that it all got lost in that, which fair shit happens, right? But then we get to this part which says, but just to ask the inevitable question, did you take any action to discard, destroy, or dispense with any official records related to this matter? And he replies, not to my recollection. I think there's a fulsome record, and not to my recollection. Really? Not to my recollection? Dude, you would know if you deleted important shit or not. You don't just go, oops, I deleted 3,000 emails of the Epstein investigation. That's not how that happens. You can say, oh, you know, there's a... I don't understand how you go, not to my recollection. You would know. You would know. You either give a definitive answer that says, I didn't, or I did. You don't go, oh, not to my recollection. Really? Like, you are not helping your case here, dude. I find that so fucking suspicious. This right here is the reason that Acosta was deposed in the first place. All right, thank you, Mr. Acosta. OPR is investigating two things. As you know, whether one or more federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida U.S. Attorney's Office may have committed professional misconduct by entering into the Non-Prosecution Agreement, or NPA, in 2007 with Jeffrey Epstein, who at the time was under investigation by that office and the FBI for engaging in widespread sexual misconduct involving underage females. The second thing we're investigating is Judge Mara's finding on February of this year in 2019 that the government may have violated, or actually, he found the government did violate the CVRA, or Crime Victims' Rights Act, when it entered into the NPA without first providing the victims with notice and a reasonable right to confer with the government. So what this means right here is that a judge already said Acosta violated victims' rights by giving a plea agreement, having that agreement pled to and signed before victims could give any sort of input whatsoever. And then we're going to say, we're going to go here, right? You are subject of the OPR investigation, that is, one of somebody whose conduct is being reviewed and evaluated by OPR, and specifically as U.S. Attorney at the time for the Southern District of Florida, you had the ultimate authority over the Epstein for a period of 2.5 years, as we understand it, from the time in the line AUSA blank blank first briefed you, and then Criminal Chief blank blank in July of 2006, and until you were formally recused from the case on or about the 8th of December 2008, after notifying the Executive Office of the U.S. Attorneys that you were seeking employment with Kirkland & Ellis, a firm of which two attorneys, Ken Starr and Jay Lefkowitz, had been representing Jeffrey Epstein. Is that correct? So this is saying, hey, dude, you know that time when you were working on the Epstein case and then you left because you were getting a job at the law firm with two lawyers that were representing Epstein? Crazy, right? Crazy. I think that speaks for itself. Now, I'm going to reference my notes because I think there's certain things that I forgot, and I want to make sure I didn't forget to touch on them. Basically, oh god, there's way more than I thought. Like I said, Epstein worked with Starr previously, so he already had that contact, which probably made it easier for him to get into the law firm. He also isn't entirely sure, like I said, how the plea went from 24 months to 18 months. We all know why. It's because he desperately wanted his lawyers to get the agreement signed. There's also emails where he replies to his lawyers asking for help, where he's like, I think it's best if I don't get involved in the negotiations at all. To me, if your employees who are beneath you are saying, hey, I need help, this isn't working, and you are in charge of them, and you have more legal experience, and you are an authority, to say, oh, well, I shouldn't get involved, is intentionally setting your team up to fail. And you failed your employees 100%. There was also what's called an immunity provision that was put in the plea agreement for all of Epstein's co-conspirators. And there were 4 people that were initially named in the provision, and those people 100% refused to agree and cooperate with law enforcement. And the problem with the immunity provision was it said for all Epstein co-conspirators, which meant that if this plea agreement was signed 20 years from now, if we found out that Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, freaking whoever was aiding and abetting and co-conspiring with Epstein, they would have immunity, and there would be nothing that anybody could do about it. On top of the 4 people that were listed in the agreement as obvious co-conspirators. And what's interesting is, it would be one thing if you give immunity to the 4 co-conspirators listed. However, they did not participate and cooperate with law enforcement, which means they're not even getting contingent immunity, which is you scratch my back, I scratch yours. They're just getting this shit for free. Another thing that I found very frustrating through all of Acosta's correspondence is that when asked why something was done incorrectly, he continuously replies, well, I assumed that because of the expertise of my law members, they knew what they were doing. Well, I assumed. I'm sorry, dude. You're in charge of this. You can't just assume shit. You have to know that things are actually being done correctly. You can't just go, oh, well, I assumed. Because that puts you in a bad spot, and it puts your firm in a bad spot, and it puts the U.S. in a bad spot. He also allowed the defense to review victim notifications after the plea was agreed upon. Like I said, there was discrepancy as to who should have notified what. But he stated that he was not legally bound to notify the victims. That it was discretionary on whether or not they should be notified depending on whether or not they were going to actually indict Epstein. Like I said, only some victims were actually notified. And as we have learned, victims are entitled to a statement, and the victims that weren't notified couldn't give a statement. So that was a huge issue. There was a victim, at least one, who reached out to Acosta and said, hey, if you're going to give him this and restitution, I don't want restitution. I want this fucker to serve jail time. Don't pay me. Up the plea deal. Give him more time. I don't care about the money. And she was completely disregarded. She was told basically fuck off. And Acosta's reasoning was, well, the agreement was signed. We can't undo it. It's legally binding. And then in that same breath, he's like, oh, well, the agreement may fall through on the defense if the defense doesn't honor it. So is the agreement legally binding or not? Is it only legally binding for the prosecution and then the defense just gets to do whatever the fuck they want? Is that how that works? Because that's not fair to that victim who said, hey, actually punish this guy. And you were like, just kidding. I don't know. I don't think we should do that. So yeah, I'm not entirely done with all of the deposition pertaining to Alex Acosta. But in case you can't tell, I am pissed because this is the guy who's in charge of everything with Epstein, who is supposed to hold this guy accountable and failed in every aspect. Every aspect. He did not give a shit about the victims. He could barely think logically enough to do his own job. I am beyond angered and frustrated because 2 years, actually 18 months, with work release could have been avoided if he actually was going to indict Epstein the way that he said he would if the defense tried to do any funny business and not agree to the terms of the plea deal. And then he consistently backtracked. And then when his lawyer said, hey, we need help, he basically looked at them and said, get fucked, I'm not getting involved. As if it's not his job to make sure this shit runs smoothly. He's a joke. A joke. And then the fact that he got recused from the case after working on it for 2 years to go work for Epstein's attorneys in their law firm tells me everything that I need to know about this guy. He was looking for a way out before it got there. He didn't care. He didn't want to be part of it. If I had to guess, he probably thought Epstein was going to win. And in a way, Epstein did because his defense lawyers got to plead down an astronomical amount and give Epstein way more benefits than he ever should have deserved. So, that's all I have to say for this episode. I need to go get some lunch. I need to take a break because I'm very, very angry. But yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, thank you guys for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I appreciate it. It helps me know that my work matters and that people actually care about what it is that I'm researching and looking into. But I will see you guys on the flip side. Please stay safe and stay psyched out.